He had it all: billions in the bank, a custom-tailored life, and a dream wedding set in the heart of California's wine country. But when he stood at the altar, in front of 100 hand-picked guests and cameras ready to capture forever, the bride never came. Instead, a video played, one that humiliated him in front of the world. How does a man survive public heartbreak when he's built a life on control? How does he rebuild when everything he trusted turns into a lie? And what happens when the person who truly sees him has been sitting quietly in the last row all along? This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a journey through silence, healing, and an unexpected love that asks for nothing and gives everything. If you've ever felt invisible, forgotten, or like your best days were already behind you, this story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's begin this quiet, powerful story. The lonely billionaire faced an empty wedding until his secretary showed up in unexpected ways. He built an empire to escape his past. But on the day he thought he'd found love, all he found was an empty chair and the entire world watching. The vineyard in Napa Valley was wrapped in late afternoon light, a warm gold that filtered through the leaves like something out of a dream. The estate, a sprawling mix of old stone, white hydrangeas, and delicate wooden archways, had been prepared for weeks. Every corner was tended to with the kind of meticulousness only money and longing could buy. Ethan Whitmore stood in the quiet of his dressing suite, high above the ceremony lawn. His tie had already been straightened, twice. His boutonniere, a single white orchid, sat pinned precisely where it should be. He looked the part. The groom, the billionaire, the man who had it all. But inside, something felt slightly off. Not wrong, exactly. Just out of reach. At 45, Ethan had built one of the most powerful biotech companies on the West Coast. He had grown up with nothing but grief and granite under his feet, buried in the cold winters of Bitter Creek, Montana. He'd left that behind years ago, or tried to. Success had been his way out, but not his way home. Today was supposed to be different. Today was about beginnings, healing, family, love. The string quartet played softly outside, just beneath the altar, draped in white roses. Guests were finding their seats, investors in tailored linen suits, old college acquaintances now dressed in silk, influencers Madison had invited, laughing gently behind oversized sunglasses. It wasn't a big wedding. Ethan didn't want that. He wanted something personal, not public, quiet, not extravagant. The ceremony was scheduled for 2:30 sharp. At 2:27, Ethan checked his phone. Still no message. He wasn't worried. Madison was theatrical. She liked grand gestures. Maybe she was perfecting her entrance, or touching up her hair. He had given her space. She liked it that way. At 2:34, he noticed a subtle shift in the music, the quartet looping the same section again. By 2:41, the guests had started to whisper. The sun had crept lower behind the hills, and the breeze was picking up, lifting the petals scattered along the aisle. Still no word. One of the planners approached him in the dressing room, speaking gently, eyes full of politeness, but no answers. "We're checking in with her suite," she said. "Just a small delay, we think." But Madison wasn't in her suite. She wasn't anywhere on the estate. At 2:55, the whispers became murmurs. A few guests checked their phones. Others stood, milling about under the guise of stretching their legs. The air, once filled with anticipation, now held something heavier, confusion edged with dread. Then, at 3:02 p.m., the massive outdoor screen behind the altar flickered to life. It wasn't part of the plan. Ethan turned, unsure of what he was looking at, and then he saw her, Madison, sitting on a velvet couch in what looked like a luxury hotel room, hair curled, makeup flawless, her dress not a gown, but a white silk robe. A glass of champagne rested in her hand. Her voice was calm, like she was filming a brand video. "If you're seeing this," she said, "then I've already made my decision." Gasps rippled through the seated guests. The music had stopped. Ethan stood frozen, I know this might feel sudden, she continued, but honestly, it's been building for a while. I cared about Ethan, truly. But I also realized something important. I wasn't in love. I was observing, studying, maybe, watching what happens when a man builds walls so high. Even he can't see over them. Her smile was soft, pitying. Ethan was a project, and I think I finished it. The screen went black. No one moved. No one breathed. The silence that followed was not a gentle one. It was the kind that hummed in your ears, the kind that swelled around the edges of shame and settled in the bones. Ethan's hands were at his sides. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't sat. He hadn't blinked. He didn't know how to leave. The planners, now panicked behind their composure, began quietly gathering candles, signaling the quartet to pack up. A few guests rose and slipped away. One by one, some with apologetic glances, others avoiding his eyes completely. He took a step toward the altar. The sun had begun to dip low. The chair meant for Madison still sat beneath the canopy of roses untouched, expectant. A small, gold-rimmed name card rested on it, her name etched in delicate script, Dr. Madison Hale. Ethan stared at that chair, as if she might still arrive. She wouldn't, and the world already knew it. Minutes later, notifications began to buzz. Hashtags that had once celebrated their upcoming union were now twisted mockeries. Madison walks away, billionaire, left at the altar, the emotional experiment. He dropped his phone without looking at the screen. The device hit the flagstone floor, bounced once, then stilled. He finally sat down on the front bench, just across from the empty chair. His hands trembled slightly as they rested on his knees. He could still smell the roses, still feel the weight of the ring box in his pocket. But mostly, he felt the eyes, those that had been present, and those watching online. He thought of Bitter Creek, of the foster homes, of all the birthdays no one had ever remembered. He thought of the long silence that had followed every goodbye in his life. This one just had more expensive flowers. As the last of the guests filtered out, only one chair remained occupied, not in the front row, not near the aisle, but at the very back near the trees, where no one had noticed her arrive. She stood slowly, quietly, smoothing the hem of her navy blue dress. And as Ethan looked up, dazed and humiliated, he saw her, Claire, still there. It was the kind of cold that settled into your bones, Bitter Creek, Montana, in late October. The wind scraped across the flat plains like it had something to prove, pulling dry leaves from the trees and flinging them against weathered fences and rusted tractors. At 7 years old, Ethan Whitmore didn't shiver anymore. He just pulled his threadbare hoodie tighter and disappeared behind the barn. The barn had been falling apart for years. The left side sagged with age, the roof patched with corrugated metal and hope. But it was the only place in the world where Ethan felt safe. Inside, the old hayloft smelled like dust and memory. He kept a stack of worn-out books hidden under a tarp books he'd found abandoned at the town library's discard pile, or pulled from yard sales where the owners hardly noticed he was there. Ethan didn't talk much at school. His teacher said he was quiet, polite. Other kids barely noticed him. He didn't play sports, didn't get invited to birthdays, didn't matter. But he read science books, biographies, medical journals far beyond his grade level. Something in the precision of facts, the cold clarity of data, gave him comfort. It made more sense than people ever had. His mother had died when he was 7. One day she was singing while she made pancakes. The next, she was gone. A stroke, they said. Quick and peaceful. Nothing about it felt peaceful. After that, it was just Ethan and his father, Wayne. But Wayne wasn't really there. Grief had hollowed him out, and the whiskey filled what remained. The man was angry in ways Ethan didn't yet have words for, slamming doors for no reason, yelling at the dog, disappearing for hours and coming back with silence in his eyes. Ethan learned early how to step quietly, how to read a room the way others read books. He could tell from the way the screen door creaked whether his father had been drinking or not. That skill, that alertness, never left him. There was an older brother once, Nathan, but he had left when Ethan was 9. headed to Alaska to work on fishing boats. He'd sent a few postcards the first year, then nothing. But Ethan had memorized every word of those postcards, reading them under the dim light of his flashlight in the barn until the ink began to fade. He would trace the handwriting with his finger, as if that could somehow bring Nathan back. High school was a blur of good grades and gray days. He wasn't bullied. People had to notice you to bully you. He simply existed, drifting through the system, acing every test and turning in assignments early. Teachers praised his work ethic. No one asked about the shadows under his eyes. One afternoon in his senior year, Ethan came across a flyer about a national science scholarship for underprivileged youth. He almost threw it away. But something in him, some flicker of hope or defiance, filled out the application. A month later, a letter arrived. He'd been accepted to the University of Utah's biotechnology program. Full ride. He packed everything he owned into a duffel bag and left before dawn. College was better. Not easier, but better. People didn't ask where you were from. They asked what you knew. And Ethan knew a lot. He absorbed lectures like a sponge, spent late nights in labs, and still found time to volunteer at clinics. Fascinated by the intersection of medicine and research, his professors called him brilliant. He called himself busy. Being busy kept the loneliness at bay. In his junior year, right before finals, he got the call. Nathan was dead. A mechanical failure on the trawler. Instant. They said, no suffering. Ethan didn't cry. He went back to his dorm room, sat on the floor, and stared at his textbooks until the sun came up. Then he went to class and took the exam. He got the highest score. Something shifted after that. Ethan stopped pretending that achievement would quiet the ache. He realized that no matter how many awards he won or how many degrees he earned, he'd still be that boy hiding in the barn, reading to feel less alone. That night, standing at the edge of the university library's rooftop, Ethan looked out over the city lights and made himself a promise. If no one was going to choose him, he would build a life so solid, so untouchable, no one would ever dare leave him again. He would become unbreakable. She wasn't his type, but her smile made him forget he ever had one. It was at a wellness symposium in San Diego where Ethan Whitmore first saw Madison Hale. The conference itself was sterile, gleaming halls, rows of chairs lined up with military precision, speakers cycling through jargon and case studies on the future of personalized medicine. He'd been invited to keynote. Of course, Ethan Whitmore didn't attend conferences anymore. He anchored them. But even as he walked off stage to tepid applause and firm handshakes, his attention snagged on something outside the usual rhythm of his carefully managed world. She was standing beneath a halo of warm light from a wall sconce, her posture loose but poised, as though she'd never once doubted the space she occupied. She was laughing head thrown back, one hand resting lightly on her hip. A group surrounded her, all of them visibly leaning in. Ethan didn't know her name yet, but he knew what it felt like to crave the kind of gravity she carried. Later that evening, at a private reception hosted by one of the sponsors, their paths crossed. She approached him, first introduced herself with that same easy smile and a warm, unhurried tone. Dr. Madison Hale, physician, author, advocate of integrative health. Also, something of a social media darling, though she said it with a lightness that suggested she didn't take it too seriously. I follow your work, she added, tilting her head. Though I've always wondered, do you believe in what you build, or just the science behind it? It wasn't flirtation exactly, but it wasn't casual either. And Ethan, who normally had no patience for small talk, found himself lingering in her presence longer than he meant to. They ended up talking for nearly an hour, about their fields, about public health policy, about turmeric lattes, about anything and nothing. And when the reception wound down, she handed him her card, not because he asked, but because she wanted him to have it. He emailed her 2 days later, just a thank you. She replied within minutes. That was how it began, a quiet thread of connection weaving its way through Ethan's otherwise ordered life. Their first coffee was at a sun-drenched cafe just outside Balboa Park. She ordered something with oat milk and cinnamon. He chose black coffee, no sugar. She teased him about it, and he found that he didn't mind. They sat outside. She talked. He listened. And occasionally, he found himself offering stories, small ones, about Montana, about books he read growing up, about things he'd forgotten he remembered. She was vibrant in ways that felt foreign to him, always in motion, always smiling, often with a camera nearby. At first, he didn't understand why she documented everything: meals, walks, the way light filtered through leaves. But she explained once, over lunch, that capturing moments helped her hold on to gratitude. Some people write journals, she said. I make little photo altars to the day. It didn't feel performative. It felt real. And it made Ethan notice things he hadn't before. The curl of steam from a mug, the way her fingers moved when she talked, the way her face lit up when a child laughed in the distance. It was like watching someone live out loud in a world that had always been muted for him. She began showing up more often in his days, inviting him to walk her dog when she was in town, texting him links to articles she thought he'd appreciate, asking him, gently but consistently, how he was feeling, not about his company, not about productivity, but about his self. No one had asked him that in years. He didn't fall for her all at once. It was slower than that, like water wearing down stone, one touch point at a time. The first time he brought her into his work life was at a quarterly strategy dinner with the board. Ethan rarely invited guests to these events, certainly not romantic ones. But Madison had asked to understand more about what he did, and he'd agreed without thinking twice. She wore a deep green dress that night, simple, elegant, and somehow disarming. She spoke with the board members as though she'd known them for years, blending charm with insight in equal measure. Afterward, one of the senior partners pulled Ethan aside. She's good for you, he said. You're lighter. I've never seen you laugh like that. Ethan hadn't noticed until someone said it. He began traveling with her, occasionally, when their schedules aligned. She invited him to wellness retreats, and he found himself sitting in circles of people he once might have dismissed, listening to conversations about healing and energy and connection. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood how she made people feel, and he understood how she made him feel. Whole, seen, chosen. She started posting photos of them, just one at first, then more. Nothing overt, just Ethan laughing at a farmer's market, Ethan walking beside her on a path lined with blooming jacarandas, Ethan holding a mason jar of green juice with mock suspicion. Each post got thousands of likes, comments poured in. You two are goals. Finally, a soft launch. This makes me believe in love again. He didn't mind the attention, not really. In fact, part of him felt proud, like maybe after everything, he was finally becoming someone people admired for something other than his brain. He was becoming part of something, part of her world. One photo in particular stood out, taken during a weekend trip to Big Sur. They were standing on a cliff at sunset. She was leaning into him, eyes closed, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. The wind had caught her hair. The sky behind them was painted in soft oranges and pinks. He wasn't even aware she'd taken it. When she posted it, the caption read, "Some moments don't need filters. Just truth." It became her most liked photo ever. Ethan saved it to his phone. He looked at it on nights when she was away. It reminded him of something he couldn't name, something tender, something hopeful. He had no idea it was the beginning of the unraveling. The shop sat on a quiet street corner in Palo Alto, nestled between a florist and a tea boutique. It wasn't the kind of jewelry store that advertised in magazines or placed signs in airport terminals. It was quiet, discreet. The kind of place where the door chimed softly, and the velvet was always the same shade of dusk. Ethan had driven there himself, no assistant, no chauffeur, no press release. He stood beneath the soft halogen light, watching as rows of engagement rings sparkled back at him, cold, perfect, impersonal. He hadn't told anyone about his plan, not his board, not his few distant friends, not even Claire, especially not Claire, The jeweler, a man in his 60s with elegant hands and a voice like aged parchment, stood beside him in silence, waiting. Ethan finally cleared his throat. "I need a ring," he said. "Something meaningful? For someone special?" the jeweler asked, though the question was polite, not prying. Ethan hesitated. "She likes purple, lavender, mostly. It calms her. Said it reminds her of light before it fades." The jeweler nodded, then opened a different case. Inside, on a pale gray cushion, sat a ring that shimmered with quiet intensity. An oval sapphire, not the typical deep blue, but a soft, muted violet. The band was rose gold, with the faintest twisting of vines etched into its curve. "She said yes," Ethan whispered to himself. Practicing, he purchased the ring without negotiating. The proposal happened 2 weeks later, at a charity gala for children's mental health, a cause Madison had recently adopted and posted about with frequency. The ballroom was lit in candlelight and white orchids, with live cello music streaming through the speakers. Photographers circled quietly, as they always did now. Ethan wore black, Madison wore silver, her hair swept up, neckline sharp, smile luminous. He asked her to step onto the stage with him just after the dessert course. She played surprised, one hand to her lips, though her eyes glittered with awareness. He knelt. Not because tradition dictated it, but because the gesture felt oddly sacred. His knee pressed into the carpet as if he were anchoring himself to something real. He opened the box. She gasped, perfectly timed. The crowd leaned forward. A murmur, a beat, a breath. Then, yes. The room erupted into applause. Madison threw her arms around him. The photographers moved in. Hashtags were born before they left the stage. That night, Madison posted a picture of the ring twinkling on her finger, hand resting gently against Ethan's chest. The caption read, "He built an empire and still chose to give me his heart. Billionaire heart. Engaged real love." Within hours, it had 1 million likes. The image made headlines. News anchors called it a love story for the modern age. Opinion pieces praised her elegance, his humility. Someone even predicted their wedding would be the next American royal moment. Ethan watched it all happen from the other side of the glass. Present, yet distant. He should have felt something brighter. Pride, joy, certainty. But instead, the emotion was like static fuzzy, full of pressure, but without clarity. He told himself it was nerves, or the scale of it all, or maybe that old scar of loneliness flaring up one last time before it healed. He didn't tell anyone about the quiet inside his chest. Claire, of course, had handled the logistics flawlessly. She confirmed press statements, coordinated with stylists, arranged ring insurance, and even fielded interview requests from magazines Ethan hadn't heard of. She never said anything beyond what was needed, just handed him envelopes to sign, messages to approve, questions to answer. But one night, as he returned home from a late investor call, he noticed a folded slip of paper on the kitchen counter. It wasn't typed, just his name, written in careful ink. Her handwriting? He picked it up absently, but didn't read it right away. He set it beside his tablet, then forgot about it. 2 days later, it was gone, replaced by a new folder of documents. Claire didn't mention it, neither did he. As weeks passed, the wedding planning took on a life of its own. Madison hired a renowned European planner who specialized in transformative experiences. They flew to Paris for cake tastings and sent their save-the-dates from Florence. Every update went on to Madison's platforms. She created a special account just for the wedding. Billionaire Bride. It had over 400,000 followers within a week. Ethan went along with it, smiled in the photos, answered questions when asked, paid invoices, nodded in meetings. He admired her energy, her clarity, her ability to draw attention and spin it into influence. Still, the question lingered, one he hadn't admitted even to himself. Was he being loved or managed? But each time doubt crept in, he told himself the same thing. This is what normal feels like. This is what happiness looks like. One afternoon, as the two of them sat at a rooftop bar overlooking downtown Los Angeles, Madison leaned into him, phone angled just so. "Smile like you believe in forever," she whispered. He did. The photo went viral. He didn't notice the way Claire began staying later at the office, then leaving earlier. He didn't ask why she stopped bringing him tea at 4:30 p.m. Earl Grey with a slice of dried orange, just the way he liked it. He didn't see the way her shoulders tensed when she heard his voice mention Madison's name in passing. And when she smiled politely during meetings, he didn't catch the ache behind her professionalism. Claire had always been there, solid, reliable, unspoken. He didn't mean to ignore her. He just forgot to see her. The wedding date was set October 14th, an autumn ceremony in Napa Valley, under vines and vintage lights. Guest list capped at 150. Madison insisted it would be romantic, but intimate, like a dream. And Ethan, standing before the mirror in a three-piece suit during a fitting, stared at his reflection and whispered, "Maybe this time, it'll be different." The screen had gone black. For a moment, there was only stillness, like the moment after thunder, when the air hangs heavy, waiting for something else to break. Then came the scraping of chairs, soft, almost apologetic at first, guests shifting in their seats, glancing down at their hands, at their phones, at anything but Ethan. No one looked at him, not even the minister, not even the violinist, who slowly lowered her bow and stepped back as if leaving a crime scene. Ethan remained standing, though he wasn't sure how. His knees were numb, his ears rang, his chest ached, not like heartbreak, but like oxygen refusing to return. The chair across from him, the bride's chair, was still empty. And yet it seemed to take up more space than anything else in the room. Someone cleared their throat behind him. Another person whispered, "We should go." Shoes shuffled on gravel. Camera shutters stopped. Even the wind seemed embarrassed. Ethan sat down on the front pew, slowly, deliberately, his back straight, like a soldier waiting for orders that would never come. His hands rested in his lap until they didn't. At some point, they rose to his face, his elbows on his knees, forehead in palms. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He just folded. The world around him kept dissolving. The string quartet began packing up their instruments. Their soft laughter, so normal, so human, felt cruel. Florists came to reclaim the arrangements. Glass vases clicked against carts. A waiter gathered half-full champagne flutes and carried them away. One of the groomsmen, a tech CEO from Seattle, walked past and muttered something like, "Sorry, man," without stopping. The woman from the catering team came to him gently and asked, "Would you like us to box the cake?" He didn't answer. She didn't press. Even the sky seemed to turn its face. The clouds stretched wider, duller. The sun lost interest. Shadows crept back across the vineyard. He hadn't noticed the ring fall. It must have slipped from his hand when he sat down, hit the gravel with a sound only he heard. When he saw it near his foot, a glint against the pale stones, he picked it up without ceremony. No tenderness, no hesitation, just picked it up like a pen he'd dropped during a meeting. He held it for a long time, then slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. No one saw, no one asked. Back inside the estate house, the wedding planner was canceling the fireworks. The florist was negotiating the return of unused centerpieces. Madison's assistant had already posted a black and white photo of the vineyard with the caption, "Even the most curated stories come to an end." The room emptied, voices faded, staff peeled away one by one like petals from a dying bloom. By the time the sun sank below the hills, the chairs were gone, the lanterns dimmed, the petals were swept up, but Ethan remained. He walked aimlessly across the grass, kicking nothing in particular. The house lights behind him flickered off one by one. A drone camera buzzed quietly above, forgotten by its operator. He had been turned into footage, into a moment, into a man with a ring and no bride. 2 hours later, Madison went live. From a rooftop in Los Angeles, with friends, champagne, and a sunset, She wore the same dress from earlier, though slightly unzipped, like she had shrugged off the weight of pretense. The caption read, "Freedom looks good on me. No more projects. Heartbreak healed." The video wasn't long, just her clinking glasses, laughing. Someone off camera asked, "What was he really like?" She smirked. "Oh, he was sweet, so serious. But you know me, I can't be someone's band-aid forever." Then, raising her glass to self-worth. "And sapphire rings I didn't have to keep. The clip spread like wildfire. Celebrities reposted, commentators dissected, satirists mimicked. Within hours, Billionaire breakdown trended on Twitter. Someone made a meme of Ethan staring at the empty chair with a caption, 'When you invest in biotech but not in emotional intelligence.' A late-night host opened with Ethan Whitmore, finally lost. Something money can't buy his dignity. Laughter, applause, cut to commercial. Back in the vineyard. Ethan watched none of it. He sat in the dark garden where the photo booth used to be. A single string of fairy lights still blinked, forgotten. In his hands, the velvet ring box, closed, still warm from his palm. He thought about the barn in Bitter Creek, about the silence, about the years he spent teaching himself not to want, not to hope, not to need. And yet, here he was crushed by hope, betrayed by want, mocked for needing. It wasn't just Madison who had left. It was the idea that he could finally be enough, that he had built a life too strong to be abandoned, that if he said the right words, gave the right ring, offered the right version of himself, someone would choose to stay. That version of him was gone. He felt like glass, sharp, clear, breakable. The wind picked up, brushing against the trees. A few petals fluttered from the branches above, landing softly at his feet. He didn't move. And then, through the fading sound of cleanup crews and distant car doors, he heard his name. Ethan, soft, almost unsure, but not afraid. He turned. It wasn't a guest. It wasn't a reporter. It wasn't Madison. It was Claire, standing a few feet away. Not in formal wear, but in the same simple navy dress she always wore to events practical, modest, forgettable to most. Her hair tied back, no makeup, just eyes filled with something that looked dangerously like concern. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't offer condolences. She just said it again, quieter. "Ethan?" He didn't answer. He didn't have words. She stepped closer, not rushing, not hesitating, just moved toward him like someone who knew the terrain of his silence. For the first time all day, someone saw him. Not the ring, not the suit, not the empire. Him. And for the first time, he realized he was still here. She hadn't come for the cake or the music. She came because she knew he would be left alone. When the last of the guests had made their hushed exits, heels clicking on flagstone, tuxedoed whispers floating behind sunglasses, and the classical quartet had long since packed away their bows, there was only one figure who remained. She sat in the last row, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her back straight despite the weight of the silence that blanketed the vineyard estate like fog rolling in from the hills. Claire Bennett had always been good at being invisible. 6 years of working beside Ethan Whitmore had taught her how to blend into the rhythm of his world without causing ripples. She knew which brand of tea he reached for when his migraines crept in. She remembered the way his voice dipped when he was tired, how he tapped his pen when thinking. She had made herself indispensable, not through noise, but through quiet, consistent presence. So, when the ceremony unraveled, when the video stopped playing, and Ethan crumbled inward like a man folded by gravity, Claire didn't rush to his side. She waited, not because she didn't care, but because she knew the worst kind of pain needed space before it could be witnessed. She only rose when the last of the event staff began to disassemble the altar. Ethan sat alone, his head bowed, one hand loosely clutching the back of the white chair where the bride was supposed to have been. She walked the gravel aisle slowly, her low heels brushing dust into the air. She held nothing, no phone, No planner, no tablet, just a soft navy shawl around her shoulders and a face that carried something gentler than sympathy. When she reached the front row, she didn't speak. She simply sat beside him. At first, Ethan didn't acknowledge her presence. His eyes were still fixed on the ocean, or perhaps nowhere at all. His hands, still clasped together, looked drained of warmth, but something in his shoulders shifted, not quite relaxing, but no longer holding up the sky. Claire didn't look at him. She stared ahead, where the rose-draped arch was now half collapsed, where the satin aisle runner had bunched from the wind, where, only an hour ago, a future had waited. Minutes passed, maybe more. A leaf drifted down from the oak overhead, landing quietly on Ethan's knee. He brushed it away, almost absently, and exhaled, not a sigh, not relief. Just breath, something he'd forgotten he was allowed to take. "Everyone left," he said, finally. His voice sounded unfamiliar, gravelly from silence, and swallowed grief. Claire turned slightly toward him. "I know. I thought at least someone would stay. Out of manners, if not care. They weren't built for that," she said softly. "But I am." The breeze tugged at the hem of her dress. From this close, he could see the faint lines near her eyes, the kind formed by concentration, not laughter. Her hair was pulled back in a simple twist, a few strands loosened by the wind. Ethan looked down. The sapphire ring still weighed in his pocket. He hadn't taken it out since it fell from his hand. He swallowed. "Why are you here?" "Claire." She looked at him then. Really looked into the hollow that had opened in him like a wound. "Because I knew you'd need someone when it all fell apart." He blinked, caught off guard by the certainty in her tone. There was no pity there, no performance. Just a quiet knowing that had sat at the edges of his life for years, unnoticed. She turned her gaze back toward the sea. "I wasn't invited. I didn't expect to be, but I came anyway." Ethan let that sit between them, the weight of it. All morning, he had been a headline in the making, a caricature in a bespoke suit, a man whose heartbreak was content for strangers. But here, beside the one woman who had never demanded his attention, never taken up space she hadn't earned, he felt seen, not fixed, not better, but seen. A gust of wind rattled the empty wine glasses still left on the tables. Somewhere behind them, the cleanup crew called for a truck. The world was moving on, but she remained. Ethan's voice dropped, barely more than a breath. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." "You don't have to know yet," she replied. "You just have to sit and breathe and not be alone." He turned toward her, slow and unsure. "Can you stay a little longer?" She didn't hesitate. "I can." And then she reached into her small clutch and pulled out a single, wrapped tea sachet, chamomile. He looked at it, then at her, confusion mixing with something almost close to a smile. "You once told me," she said gently, "that chamomile was the only thing that ever helped you sleep. You were jet-lagged after Berlin and couldn't find any at the hotel, so I kept one in my purse, just in case." Ethan stared at the little packet like it held something sacred. It did, in a way. Care, not attention, not spectacle, just care. The sun dipped lower behind the hills, casting long shadows over the rows of vines now golden in the late light. They sat together on that stone bench, Ethan and Claire, not saying much more, not needing to. In the quiet, something shifted, not resolution, but presence. And for the first time that day, Ethan didn't feel abandoned. He didn't feel humiliated or small. He simply felt human. He didn't want comfort. He wanted quiet. And that's why he chose the house his mother once called, the place where noise goes to rest. Ethan disappeared the day after the wedding. No press conference, no official statement, no post from the PR team. He simply vanished. The media speculated endlessly. Some said he'd gone to Europe. Others whispered about rehab, breakdowns, lawsuits. The headlines stretched like shadows, all hungry and hollow. But only one person knew the truth: Claire. She had watched him board a small, chartered plane with nothing but a duffel bag and a worn copy of Leaves of Grass in his hand. He didn't say where he was going, just handed her an envelope, simple, unmarked, containing a key and a brief note. If anyone asks, tell them I'm breathing. The house sat on the edge of Lake Willoughby, tucked into the folds of northern Vermont like a secret cradled in pine trees. It had belonged to his mother, once a modest, two-bedroom cottage with faded shutters and a fireplace that crackled like old memory. Ethan hadn't been there in over 2 decades. He remembered it only vaguely long summers by the water, the scent of wood smoke in early fall, his mother humming while slicing apples at the kitchen counter. After she died, the house was locked up, maintained by a quiet groundskeeper he'd paid annually but never spoke to. Now, it welcomed him back without question. The first morning, Ethan woke to silence so complete it startled him. No phones, no notifications, just the creaking of the floorboards under bare feet and the soft rustle of wind through the tall pines. He didn't make coffee right away. Instead, he opened every window in the house, letting the lake air flood the rooms. It smelled of moss and birch bark and something cold and clean. He found an old kettle and boiled water. There was still tea in the cupboard, though it smelled faintly of dust. He drank it anyway, sitting on the porch wrapped in one of his mother's old quilts. He didn't cry, he didn't think, he just breathed. Each day took on a rhythm. Wake, walk to the water, make tea, sit, read, write nothing, repeat. He didn't bring a laptop, no phone calls, no screens, just the stillness and the slow thawing of something inside him that had long been frozen stiff. Some mornings, he walked barefoot down to the lake, letting the icy edge lap at his toes. Other times, he chopped wood with a hatchet he found in the shed. The motion of it split, lift, drop became a meditation. The house didn't demand anything. It just held him, and he let himself be held. On the 5th day, a small package arrived, no label, just his name on the brown wrapping in soft black ink. Inside, he found a wool sweater, a pair of thick socks, a leather-bound journal, and a folded note, Claire's handwriting. When you can't speak it aloud, write it down. He sat with that sentence for a long time. The journal was empty, crisp pages, faint lines, waiting. His hand hovered above it with a pen, unsure, that night, under the flicker of candlelight. He opened to the first page and wrote, "I don't want to be alone." Then he closed the book, and finally, he slept. The next morning, he rose before the sun. The lake was still, not a ripple. Mist hovered just above the surface, as if the world was holding its breath. Ethan sat on the porch steps, the journal in his lap, coffee warm in his hands. He didn't write, he just watched. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, his mind didn't race. The silence didn't frighten him, it welcomed him, held him like a mother might. He stood, stretched, and walked down the gravel path to the dock. The fog parted around him, and in that space of breath and wood and water, he reached for his phone for the first time since the wedding. There were hundreds of missed calls, thousands of emails. He ignored them all. He typed one number. Claire answered on the second ring. She didn't say hello. "Hi," he said softly. There was a pause. Then, "You okay?" "No," he admitted. "But I think I'm becoming okay." Another pause. "Do you still have that week off you never used?" "Yes," she said simply. "Would you come up here? I'll pack today." He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "There's a fire pit. Bring marshmallows." She laughed gently. And for the first time since the world had collapsed around him, Ethan smiled. Not for a camera, not for a crowd, but for himself. That evening, he cooked himself dinner. Just pasta and garlic and too much pepper. He set the table with mismatched plates and poured water from a pitcher. There was no music, no noise, only the clink of a fork against ceramic, the rustle of wind, the whisper of pages turning in the journal beside him. He opened it again, this time The words came easier. "I don't know what love is supposed to look like, but I think it's quieter than I thought. That night, before bed." He folded Claire's note and placed it under his pillow. Not for luck, but because it felt like a piece of her was there, like she'd sent more than just a sweater and paper. She had sent permission to pause, to ache, to heal, and he would honor it. Not perfectly, not quickly, but wholly. And as he turned off the lights and slipped under the old quilt, Ethan whispered into the darkness, "I hope you bring your favorite book." He didn't need anything else. Just company. Just the sound of someone else breathing beside the quiet. She brought no suitcase, no laptop, no answers. Just herself. And that was more than enough. Claire arrived just as the first snow began to fall. Not in a flurry or storm, but soft like powder shaken from the sky by an unseen hand. The kind of snow that didn't demand attention, only invited stillness. The gravel path was barely dusted, yet her boots crunched as she stepped out of the cab, her breath forming clouds that vanished just as quickly. Ethan opened the front door before she reached the porch. They didn't speak. He just took her small canvas bag light enough to carry with 2 fingers and set it down beside the entry rug. Her coat was damp from the snow. She peeled it off, shook it once, and hung it near the fireplace without asking. There was no hug, no greeting, no explanation, just presence, and that was enough. They didn't make big plans that first day. Instead, Claire rolled up her sleeves and helped Ethan tidy the kitchen, wiping out drawers that hadn't seen utensils in years, sorting through mismatched mugs, discarding a bag of flour that had long since expired. She hummed a little as she worked, not a melody he recognized. Maybe it wasn't even a melody at all, just breath moving through memory. He watched her move around the small kitchen like it was a place she had known all her life. At one point, he offered to help chop vegetables. She handed him a knife without a word. They made soup potatoes, leeks, time nothing fancy. They ate in silence, sitting across from each other at the old wooden table, their spoons clinking softly against ceramic bowls. Outside, snow fell against the windows in a hush that blanketed the world. No music, no screens, no questions, just 2 people sharing warmth, one small bite at a time. After dinner, Claire lit the fire, Ethan offered, but she shook her head gently, already kneeling in front of the hearth. She stacked the logs like puzzle pieces, added kindling, and struck the match with steady fingers. Soon, the flames crackled to life. She sat back on her heels, watching the fire catch. Ethan brought 2 mugs of tea and set one beside her on the hearth. Still, they didn't speak. They sat side by side on opposite ends of the old woven rug, knees tucked up, steam rising between them. The glow of the fire softened the lines on their faces, made the silence feel like company rather than absence. Hours passed this way. Occasionally, Claire would lean back and glance toward the ceiling beams, as if remembering something. Ethan would sip his tea and watch the flames, his fingers tracing the ridges of the mug without thought. It was a kind of stillness Ethan had never known. Even in childhood, silence had been something sharp, dangerous, a warning. But this was different. This was silence as invitation, as shelter. It was as if her presence gave him permission to not perform, to not explain, to not solve, just be. Eventually, Claire spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, just as naturally as snow falling outside. "My mom used to sit by the fire when she was tired," she said, even when the doctors told her she should be resting in bed. "She'd come to the den, drag her blanket and sit in that old armchair we had. Said the crackling helped her forget the chemo." Ethan didn't respond right away. He turned his gaze to her, not interrupting. Claire smiled faintly. "I was 16. I didn't know what to do with all of it. People kept saying things like, 'Be strong for her,' or 'Don't let her see you cry.' But none of that helped." She paused, staring into the fire like it held her memories. "So, I stopped talking. I just sat beside her. Every evening, didn't matter if we spoke or not, I'd just be there. Sometimes I'd knit, or read, or just breathe. Ethan swallowed. Something about her voice, it carried the kind of grief that had aged into something quieter than sorrow. I think that's when I realized, Claire continued, being there matters more than saying the right thing. People don't need you to fix the pain. They just need to not be alone in it. The fire popped, a small ember leaping onto the stone. Ethan nodded slowly. He looked down at his hands. I don't think anyone's ever sat with me like that before, he said. Claire didn't correct him, didn't remind him that she had. She just nudged her mug a little closer to his and said, "There's a first time for everything." Later, she moved to the armchair near the fire, pulled her legs up under her, wrapped herself in the same quilt Ethan had been using all week. He stayed on the rug, neither asked the other to move. They simply shared space the way people who've been lonely too long do, gently, without urgency. They spoke a little more, about nothing and everything. Books they loved, places they'd wanted to visit but never had, songs that made them cry for no reason at all. Claire admitted she couldn't cook without burning garlic. Ethan confessed he'd once taken a ballroom dancing class just to impress someone who never showed up. They laughed not loudly, not easily, but with the weight of people remembering what it meant to feel human again. When the clock ticked toward midnight, Claire stood and stretched. I should get some sleep, she said, unless you need anything. Ethan shook his head. But as she turned toward the hallway, he hesitated. His voice was softer than the firelight. Would you mind staying a few more days? She paused in the doorway, turned back to him. Her face was unreadable for a moment. Then she smiled. I brought extra socks. That was all she said. But it was more than enough. Healing isn't loud. It's not dramatic. Sometimes it's just pancakes on a snowy morning and someone humming in the kitchen. The days began to settle into something like rhythm. No alarms, no agendas, just light spilling through frost-dusted windows, the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen, and the quiet shuffle of socks on hardwood floors. Ethan would rise first. He'd boil water, grind beans by hand, and pour the coffee slow, watching the steam curl upward like memory. Some mornings, Claire would already be up, curled in the armchair with a book, her hair still sleep-tousled, a throw blanket around her shoulders. Other days, she'd sleep in, and he'd leave a warm mug by the fireplace, the steam rising like a gentle offering. One morning, she made pancakes, badly. They were overcooked on one side and raw on the other. She swore under her breath, but Ethan ate them anyway with syrup and a grin. She stuck her tongue out at him and promised to improve. The next day, she did. It became a sort of ritual: burnt edges, soft centers, laughter drifting between sips of orange juice. They didn't talk about the world outside. It didn't exist here. Instead, they talked about small things, books they'd never finished, favorite soups, the weird names people gave dogs. Ethan admitted he'd once wanted to be a poet. Claire confessed she'd submitted a short story to a magazine under a fake name and never heard back. It wasn't therapy, it was better. It was presence. Each afternoon, they walked, not far, sometimes only to the edge of the woods, sometimes around the frozen lake trail. Claire wore an old beanie with a ridiculous pom-pom on top. Ethan carried a thermos of tea. They didn't always speak, but their silence no longer felt like a lack. It felt like a language of its own. One day, Ethan stopped by the fence near the trail. The old wooden post leaned, weathered by time. He knelt, adjusted it, secured it with a bit of twine. Claire watched quietly. Fixing it won't change much, she said. No, Ethan agreed. But it feels good to do something that stays fixed. She nodded. That night, she slipped a note into his jacket pocket. Even broken things deserve steady hands. He found it the next morning, pressed it flat, and tucked it into the back of his journal. Slowly, Ethan began to laugh again. At first, just a chuckle, then louder, freer, until one day, Claire, while climbing the small slope behind the cabin, lost her footing on a patch of ice. She landed in a soft heap of snow, arms flailing. He rushed forward half concerned, half amused only to find her blinking up at him, face flushed, hair full of snow. "You okay?" he asked, barely stifling his grin. She nodded, brushing snow off her coat. Dignity slightly damaged, ego bruised, otherwise fine. He offered his hand, she took it, and when she was upright again, neither let go, not right away. There, in that quiet clearing, surrounded by pine and white silence, something passed between them. Not romantic, not yet. Just something real, and soft, and present. They walked back still hand in hand. That evening, the fire crackled low. Ethan sat with a blanket over his knees. Claire stirred a pot of soup. The air smelled of rosemary and garlic. He turned to her. "You think this is what healing looks like?" Claire didn't answer right away. She ladled soup into bowls, handed him one, then sat across from him by the fire. "I think healing looks different for everyone," she said finally. "But yes, I think this might be yours." He looked into the fire, then back at her. "I haven't thought about her in days." Claire didn't ask who. He continued, more to himself than to her. "I used to think love had to be grand, loud, prove something to the world." And now she asked gently. He smiled, faintly. "Now I think maybe love is just breakfast, and firewood, and showing up again tomorrow." Claire sipped her soup. "Sounds like the beginning of a better poem." When the dishes were done and the house quieted, Claire stepped outside for air. Ethan followed. The sky was clear, stars like freckles scattered across velvet. They stood in silence for a while, side by side, watching their breath rise and fade. Then Claire spoke. "Do you think you're ready to forgive yourself?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at her, not startled, not defensive, just thoughtful. "I don't know," he said, "but maybe I'm ready to try." Claire nodded, stepping a little closer. "Then I'll stay." For the trying. And Ethan, for the first time in a very long time, believed someone meant it, somewhere in the woods. A fox cried, the wind stirred the trees, and in the little house by the lake, two people carried each other forward not with declarations, but with footsteps in the snow. He'd spent years being admired, but never once had he truly been seen. The lamp near the window cast a golden pool of light, softening the edges of the room as the fire behind them crackled low. Snow tapped gently against the windows, as if nature itself were whispering to be let in. Claire sat on the window bench, knees drawn up beneath a thick throw, a book resting lightly in her lap. Her eyes moved slowly across the page, occasionally pausing to gaze out at the dark beyond the glass. The line between reading and thinking blurred in the quiet. Ethan watched from across the room, not stared. Watched, not the way he had once observed business partners or investors assessing, evaluating, weighing outcomes. This was different. This was stillness with attention. And as he looked, he realized something strange. He wasn't seeing Claire for the first time. He was seeing her differently, not as the assistant who arranged his flights or remembered his lunch preferences, not the woman who stood at the edge of every boardroom, never taking credit for the calm she brought into the chaos. No. She was the person who had watched him break and had stayed anyway, and he had almost missed her. Claire turned a page in her book. She didn't notice his gaze right away. When she did, she looked up, offering a soft, curious smile. "What?" He didn't answer immediately. "I don't know," he said, "just seeing you." She tilted her head, amused but gentle. "I've been here the whole time." He nodded. "I know." He walked to the armchair across from her and sat down slowly, like the air around them had shifted and he didn't want to break it. "For so long," he said, "I thought the only way to be loved was to be impressive, to be in control, polished, unshakable." Claire closed the book, folding the corner of the page without glancing down. "I used to spend hours rehearsing everything." Ethan continued. "Meetings, speeches, even dinners. Like, if I said or did the right things, maybe I'd finally be enough." Claire didn't rush in with comfort. She let the silence linger. "Were you trying to be perfect for her?" she asked softly. He nodded. For everyone. Even for myself. She looked at him for a long moment, then said, I never needed you to be perfect. I just needed you to be real. Ethan blinked. No one had ever said that to him. Not in those words. Not with that clarity. Not with that softness. I think, he said, voice quiet. I've spent my whole life earning rooms I didn't even want to be in. Claire smiled faintly. And now I want to be here, he said, in this room, with you. She didn't say anything, but her shoulders relaxed, the kind of softening that happens when armor isn't needed anymore. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped loosely. His voice broke slightly. Why didn't I see you before? Claire looked at him without judgment, then answered, not with pain, not with resentment, but with truth, because I wasn't trying to be seen. Ethan inhaled, slow. There was something so gentle in her honesty that it didn't wound, it revealed, like someone lifting a sheet to show you the floor beneath was solid after all. He thought back to all those meetings, all those days Claire had stood nearby, quiet but constant. He remembered canceled flights rescheduled without asking, presentations magically ready when he forgot, birthday cards signed and mailed, ties ironed and placed neatly by his suitcase, all the things she did without applause. He hadn't been blind, just distracted by the noise of his own life, and she'd never tried to interrupt it. She simply waited until he was ready. They sat in that quiet for a while. No drama, no swelling music, just the hush of two people arriving in the same place at the same time. He stood first, walked to the window. She watched him approach, eyes soft but unreadable. He held out his hand, not as invitation, not as demand, but as acknowledgement. She took it, not to rescue him, not to fix anything, but to say, I'm here too. Their fingers intertwined like they had always known how to do it, not with fire, not with passion, but with something steadier, like breath, like promise. Ethan squeezed gently, and Claire did the same. Outside, the wind slowed. Inside, no words were needed, only warmth, and the shared quiet of being seen, maybe for the first time. In the glow of that lamp and the hush of falling snow, two hands stayed clasped, no longer searching, no longer hiding, just present. And that was more than enough. The first wedding had flowers, champagne, and cameras. This one had only truth. The morning came soft and gray. Snow dusted the edges of the lake like powdered sugar on warm bread. The trees stood bare but not barren, their limbs holding space for the sky. There was no rush, no lineup of vendors, no timeline, just the quiet hum of something sacred being born not out of spectacle, but out of stillness. Claire stood at the edge of the porch, her dress brushing her ankles. It wasn't white, not exactly, more like the color of cream stirred into coffee. Simple, loose, beautiful in the way worn linen always is comfortable enough to breathe in. Ethan waited by the old dock. No tuxedo. Just a white shirt, sleeves rolled, collar open, and a look on his face that said he'd stopped holding his breath, not just for today, but for good. There were no rows of chairs, no aisle to walk down, only pine needles and snow beneath their feet, and the lake before them frozen still, like even nature was pausing to listen. A man stood beside Ethan, gray hair, leather gloves, a deep voice warmed by years. His name was Walter. He had once been a friend of Ethan's mother, a quiet presence from his childhood summers at the lake. He wasn't a minister, not officially, but he had known what grief looked like and what peace sounded like. And so, he was perfect. Claire stepped forward slowly. Ethan met her halfway. They didn't stop to adjust her hem or fix his collar. No photographers waited with lenses, no bridesmaids, no groomsmen, just the crunch of snow, the shared rhythm of two sets of footsteps meeting at the same point, and hearts that had finally caught up. Walter cleared his throat, not formally, just enough to break the moment gently. He looked at the couple, then at the sky, then said, Sometimes we get lost trying to find the right words. But the truth is, the words don't matter as much as the quiet you carry when someone else enters your life. He looked at Ethan. At your first wedding, there was applause, noise, spectacle, but no peace. He turned to Claire. Today, there's only silence, and yet, everything that matters is present. He smiled. Peace is louder than applause. Claire turned toward Ethan. They hadn't written vows. They hadn't rehearsed anything. But in that moment, she reached for his hands and said quietly, simply, I choose you. Not for one day, not for the days we'll remember, but for every ordinary day that follows. Ethan didn't blink, didn't clear his throat, just let the words settle between them. Then replied, I choose you. For burnt pancakes, for missed trains, for soft music on tired nights, for every morning that comes without fanfare. He paused. For all the ways we'll fail and keep trying. Claire's eyes glistened, not from ceremony, but from knowing. Walter raised one hand. There is no one to pronounce you husband and wife, he said, because you've already lived the vows most people only say. Then, he nodded, and that was that. They were married, no kiss, no clapping, just two souls who had walked the long road of silence and finally found someone who stayed. After the ceremony, they lingered by the lake. Claire leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Something simple, he said, handing it to her. She opened it. Inside was a ring silver, brushed, unpolished, no diamonds, just a narrow sapphire set into the band. Her favorite stone. She smiled, ready to slide it on. Then she paused. There was something etched inside. Tiny. She squinted. You were never alone? Claire's breath caught, and for the first time that day, she wept, not from sadness, not from joy, but from the quiet, aching relief of being seen and finally, believed. They walked back to the house, hand in hand. No cars waited, no reception hall, just a small kitchen, 2 mugs of tea, and a pan already warming on the stove. Ethan cooked eggs. Claire sliced fruit. There was no playlist curated for ambiance, just a soft jazz record spinning in the corner, gentle saxophone pouring like morning light. They sat at the same wooden table as always. No toast, no speeches, just the clink of forks, the warmth of shared food, and the sound of snow falling outside. At one point, Claire looked up and said, Do you think we should have told someone? Ethan grinned. Maybe, but I think they'll understand. She laughed. Eventually, he reached across the table and took her hand, thumb tracing the new ring. I didn't want anyone else's voices in this moment, he said, just yours. The snow kept falling. Outside, the lake lay still. Inside, 2 people ate breakfast like it was any other day, and that, somehow, made it everything. No applause, no spotlight, just one long, quiet note of love that had nothing left to prove. And in the end, that was the loudest truth of all. He once wrote, I don't want to be alone. Now he writes, I never was. The house had aged softly over the years, paint chipped in the corners of the windowsills. The floorboards creaked more now, not from wear, but from life. A pair of small boots leaned near the front door, muddy from an afternoon of puddle jumping. 2 dog bowls sat by the fireplace, one empty, one half full, and somewhere in the quiet rhythm of a late Vermont spring evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, a leather-bound journal open in front of him, the same one from 5 years ago, the one Claire had sent in a box, along with a sweater and a single note. When you can't speak it aloud, write it down. His handwriting had changed since then, looser, less sharp. He liked that. He liked who he'd become when he stopped trying to earn everything. Outside, the sun began its slow descent, painting the lake in strokes of gold and rose. Inside, the house breathed, gently, faithfully. Claire was upstairs, reading to Luke, their son 3 years old, full of questions and half-formed words. His laughter filled the corners of the house like light, and somehow, it never interrupted the quiet Ethan once thought he needed to be alone in. It added to it. Two dogs, Rusty and Mabel, slept curled in mismatched chairs near the fire. The only sound was the occasional sigh, the rustle of a turning page, and the wind outside whispering through the pine trees. Ethan dipped his pen and wrote slowly, carefully. Now I know love was always beside me, quiet, faithful, waiting. He sat back, reading the words once more. Then, he flipped to the first page of the journal. That one sentence stared back at him. Untouched all these years, I don't want to be alone. He didn't cross it out, didn't replace it. He simply added beneath it, I never was. Footsteps padded softly down the stairs. Claire entered the room, tying her robe at the waist. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and her face still carried the calm that came from bedtime stories and goodnight kisses. She leaned against the doorway, watching him. Writing again, she asked, voice soft. He smiled. Just reminding myself of where I've been. She crossed the room and placed a hand gently on his shoulder, squeezing once before sitting beside him. Her eyes scanned the page, then the fire, then his face. What did it say, she asked. He turned the journal toward her. She read it, quietly, then placed her palm flat over the words, not to hide them, but to hold them. They didn't say much after that, didn't need to. She rested her head on his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her waist. They sat like that for a long time, watching the sky shift, feeling the weight of the day settle into the bones of the house. Luke stirred upstairs, mumbling something in his sleep. One of the dogs stretched. The fireplace crackled once, then quieted. Claire whispered, Do you remember the day I stayed behind? After the wedding, Ethan nodded. I remember thinking I didn't deserve it. You didn't have to, she said. You just had to be outside. The wind rustled the pine branches gently. Inside, a man and a woman held each other in the soft, knowing that not all love is loud. Some love grows slowly, like roots. Some love shows up quietly and stays. And some love, if you're lucky, teaches you that you were never as alone as you believed. And as the last light of day slipped behind the hills, Ethan closed the journal, kissed the woman beside him, and whispered into the hush, I'm home, not in a place, but in a presence, in a love that didn't need to be earned, just lived. Sometimes, the loudest kind of love is the one that doesn't need to be declared. We often chase admiration, success, and the kind of relationships that look perfect from the outside. But in the quiet corners of life, it's the steady presence, the person who stays, when there's nothing to gain, that becomes our true home. Ethan's story reminds us that being seen is not the same as being watched. Real connection isn't found in grand gestures or perfect moments, but in the ordinary morning coffee, shared silence, hands held without needing to explain. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it shows up in the last row, sits beside you in your darkest hour, and simply says, I'm here. If you've ever doubted your worth, or believed that love was something to earn, remember you are already enough, and the right people will never ask you to prove it. So, slow down, be real. And when love knocks gently instead of loudly open the door, that's where peace begins. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart even just a little, we hope you'll pass it on. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every click helps us bring more quiet, meaningful stories into the world. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and remember, sometimes the softest stories leave the deepest marks.